Pardon me.
Mm.
There we go.
Welcome to SoFiA, the Sea of Faith in Australia. SoFiA promotes the open exploration of religion, spirituality, and the search for meaning. I'm David Miller. I'm hosting today's event, and our speaker is Fergus McGinley, and his topic is It's All About the Metanoia. Fergus, over to you.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you for the amazing opportunity to present to you this afternoon. I'm coming to you from downtown Adelaide in South Australia. Now, let me get my screen share going, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to. Can you see that, folks?
Yes, it's quite clear and big.
Wonderful. That's great. So the title of my talk today, it's all about the metanoia, as you can see on the screen. There's a metanoia in general and a metanoia in particular. It's the latter I'm referring to in the title, the metanoia with a capital M, which I'll define for you shortly. If you've read my recent book, The God Who Doesn't Exist, there it is on the slide, or you've read the recent essay I posted on SoFiA Facebook, the link to earlier this week, then you'll have a pretty good idea already of what I mean by the metanoia. My claim in today's presentation will be that one way or another, this capital M metanoia is the most urgent thing in all of human existence for us to aspire to, the veritable holy grail of human life. The survival and flourishing of our species absolutely depends on it. But that it is fundamentally problematic. It requires something we humans naturally just don't have, so that we need necessarily some real objective outside help to get our hands on it. So, metanoia in general and the metanoia in particular. First to the word itself. Metanoia is a beautiful Greek word. You can see it there on the screen. Metanoia from change, meta change, and from nous or nous, the Greek word for mind. So a change or transformation in your awareness, understanding, your whole mindset. The word is now used in psychology, referring to a process of psychological transformation, often precipitated by a crisis or breakdown, a shift in an individual's perception of self, others, life, typically involving disintegration of an old identity, followed by the emergence of a reorganized, more integrated self. I think I pinched that definition from the internet. In literary studies, you talk about a thematic metanoia, which is a profound change in a character's mind, heart, or worldview. In theology, this is where its import into English originates. Its use comes from early Greek texts of the New Testament, where it is commonly translated as repentance or conversion. Generally, metanoia sounds like a pretty good thing. There's a real sense in its current usage of a positive transformation in your life, even psychological or spiritual healing. But what now, however, about the metanoia in particular? The one I am claiming is the holy grail of human life. Well, I take my cue from the words usage in the New Testament, especially out of the mouth of Jesus himself. It seems to me to be the very thing that Jesus' teaching is always pointing to. Here it is, the metanoia, the gradual transformation over time in a person from their natural-born state of self-centeredness to one of increasing selflessness. Selflessness, developing skills of intentional, selfless cooperation with others, kindness, friendliness, respect, consideration, care, politeness, service, and so on. This capital M metanoia works in a series of cycles in our lives, each cycle typically starting with a breakdown that is of the order of repentance. You come to an experience, a realization, often very painful, of your own futile, self-destructive selfishness, then proceeds to a rebuilding phase in which you begin to establish a new attitude, a more intentionally selfless approach to others and the world. As I've defined it, this capital M metanoia is, in fact, I would say, the mother of all metanoias, because all real deep down change in human life, all real learning involves at its center an often painful letting go of our narrow self-focus and an opening up of ourselves more selflessly to the world. So in defining capital M metanoia, I'm really trying to get at the essential core processes of metanoia in general. So, metanoia with a capital M, the mother of all metanoias. We'll look more closely at how it works in detail a bit later. But why is it, as I've claimed, the holy grail of human existence, the most urgent thing for us to aspire to? Why does our very survival and then hopefully our flourishing absolutely depend on it? Well, think about it. The root cause of all human problems, everything from little children not playing nicely together in the playground to climate change and the threat of nuclear conflict, is people behaving selfishly, putting their self-interest before the interests of others and the world. All human bad behavior, uncaring, indifference, nastiness, arrogance, greed, violence, anger, cruelty, self-righteousness, judgmentalness, acting out of privilege or entitlement, etc., are all at root forms of selfishness. This is the problem usually denoted by the dreaded S word, sin. Natural-born human self-centeredness, which, unless we undergo the metanoia and start to develop some capacity for setting aside our self-interest in favor of the interests of others, morphs as we grow up into adult life into conscious, intentional selfishness, which is just so destructive, wrecking relationships, causing havoc in human society and the world. Sin, no, not disobedience to the laws and commands of an authoritarian creator God, who almost certainly is really just a projection of our own selfish, judgmental selves. Don't worry, we'll come back to this later in the presentation. Rather, very natural, intentional human selfishness at the root of all human problems, from the smallest to the biggest. But selfishness is only the beginning of our problems, and oh, how we wish that was all there was to it. For individual attitudes and acts of selfishness go out into the collective social space around us to form complex, virulent cultural structures we refer to by the word evil. Racism, nationalism, fascism, sexism, drug culture, crime, religious extremism, pornography, pedophilia, gambling culture, etc. These structures of evil then feed back into our individual lives and amplify ordinary, natural human selfishness into something much more dangerous. Otherwise, ordinary, decent people becoming capable of truly unthinkable acts: hatred, violence, murder, even on a collective scale. As they form in the virtual cultural space around us, structures of evil acquire a relatively independent, parasitic life of their own, which explains why it is that historically we have understood evil in terms of real life supernatural beings, demons, spirits, even the ultimate personification of evil, the devil. Help! What we're up against, therefore, the core problem of human existence is this deadly duo of individual sin, selfishness, and collective evil. 'Twas ever thus, of course. Sin and evil are as old as the human race itself. In the modern era, however, they seem to have got themselves into a sort of feedback loop to the extent that we are now experiencing what has been described as a polycrisis, a whole cluster of existential threats to humanity seemingly conspiring together at one time. There's a list: human-induced climate change, Cold War 2.0 with a new axis of evil and a real challenge to democracy and the so-called rules-based world order. Hot war in Ukraine and the Middle East with the real threat of going nuclear. Continuing refugee crises around the globe. Social, political, and economic polarization in the global West. Fears of the uncontrolled development of AI, and so on. So, yes, our very survival seems to now be on the line, and at the root of it all is basic human selfishness, aided and abetted at every point by cultural forms of evil. It is indeed, therefore, as I say, all about the metanoia, as I have defined it, our undergoing of the transformation from natural-born selfishness to very unnatural selflessness, individually and collectively, before it's too late. Beyond survival, the metanoia is the key to our flourishing as a species. It's the key to any notion we might have of the good life, all the things we usually find ourselves searching for: meaning, freedom, happiness, well-being, identity, connection, belonging, you name it. At the collective level, at the collective societal level, the metanoia is the key to security, peace, equality, justice, prosperity, the development of genuinely democratic culture and society, no less. So, what about it then? How can we actually undergo the metanoia individually and collectively? What are our prospects for it? I want to now talk about it on 4 levels. Firstly, the evolutionary level, and we're talking there about the evolution of human cooperation, or sometimes referred to as altruism. Then the individual human level, then the historical role of religion, and then the societal level with the development of democracy. So, firstly, the evolutionary level. We're talking here about the evolution of human cooperation. The obvious evolutionary precursor of human cooperation is non-human animal cooperation. And there are various theories out there, just a quick Google search away, which very plausibly plot a gradual, continuous development of human cooperation out of that precursor background. We need to acknowledge, however, that animal cooperation and human cooperation, even though they might look like the same sort of thing, are actually chalk and cheese, different in kind, not just degree. Animal cooperation is non-conscious, instinctive, biologically based. Human cooperation, however, is conscious, intentional, psychologically based. So there's an immediate problem in plotting a continuous development from animal to human cooperation. There are essentially two different things involved. The theory of evolution itself seems to deny that such a continuous development from one to the other could occur. Let's imagine that early humans somehow acquired a nascent capability for intentional selfless cooperation, courtesy, say, of a random genetic mutation, which then evolved over time through natural selection into a more substantial capability. A random genetic mutation causing us to be more friendly and kind to each other? How wonderfully fortuitous. The problem straight away, however, is that any capability for selflessness, which was determined by a genetic mutation, would necessarily be instinctive and biological rather than conscious and intentional, and could therefore only ever mimic real selflessness. And then, as soon as the lucky organisms in question, the recipients of the fortuitous mutation, did just that, let go of their self-interest in favor of others, natural selection would immediately shoot them down in flames, deselect rather than select them. So, as far as a Darwinian evolutionary explanation of the development of human cooperation goes, we'd have to say that the jury is still out. On one hand, it feels like that there should be an explanation, but on the other, such an explanation might be impossible in principle. Now to the individual level. This is really the most interesting level because here we can directly observe the metanoia happening and analyze the process in detail. Little human children growing up from infancy to adulthood. The metanoia live 24/7. The first and most obvious thing to note is that little humans don't develop the capacity for selfless cooperation spontaneously off their own bat. Rather, only through outside intervention, explicit teaching by their parents, firstly, and then other interested parties like other extended family members, teachers, and so on. Selfless cooperation in all its forms, playing nicely, sharing, being kind and generous, showing good manners, being polite, caring for and helping others, is, yes, a learned behaviour, not a natural-born instinctive one. The only natural-born instinctive behaviour we possess is the very opposite, self-centeredness, the very form of behaviour we need to most urgently get beyond, as I've been saying. You can observe the breakdown phase of the metanoia in little humans very clearly around age 2, the terrible twos, we call it, with their sudden propensity for amazing tantrums as they start to face the shocking reality that the world doesn't always cooperate with their schemes. It's really a snapshot of the metanoia for us generally. Parents restrain, console, distract their little darlings, trying to turn the breakdown tantrum into a learning experience they can draw on next time. Without outside intervention, the natural resort for us when things don't go our way is to sulk, despair, harbour resentment, give up, or argue, fight back, digging ourselves into an even bigger hole, or worse still, succeeding in our fight back, which only serves to reinforce our self-centeredness. A parent, friend, teacher, even a disinterested bystander, or the law will hopefully intervene, however, to save us from ourselves. At this point, What the little child, we, desperately need to let go of is the very thing that, in this moment, is the cause of all our problems: our futile faith, trust, belief in ourselves. We shift our faith, trust, belief to, instead, the other self, the parent or other intervener who is offering their help to us. This requires real courage, faith, to go against our nature and follow the advice of someone who is telling us to let go of our selfish scheming and open ourselves up to the needs and concerns of others for a change. Something we usually probably can never find within ourselves. We have to, so to speak, get a download of faith, trust, belief from the outside agency who is offering their help to us. Selflessness teachers who come to our rescue, in whom we put our faith in order to be rescued. It's clear who they are in the case of each of us individually, our parents principally in most of our cases, and our parents, in their case, were rescued, taught by their parents, presumably, and so on down the generations. So how did it all begin? Who or what is the outside selflessness teacher for humanity as a whole, in whom we can put our faith, trust, belief in order to be rescued from ourselves collectively? Which brings me now to the third level on which I want to talk about the metanoia, the historical role of religion. Even just a quick glance down the long, winding history of religion will elicit the fact that this particular human cultural activity has always been vitally concerned with the metanoia, with teaching the skills of selfless cooperative living in community and society. Think of, for example, the Mosaic Law, the dreaming stories of Australian Aboriginal religion, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, Confucianism, and so on. And whether we think the gods and God were actually real or were never anything more than, as I suggested earlier, unconsciously formed projections of the human psyche, it was certainly these multifarious gods whom religion always looked to first and foremost for inspiration and guidance with the metanoia, indeed, to actually broker it in us. Supernatural gods, or a one God existing outside of and in and independently of us, whose primary role is to teach us how to cooperate selflessly in community and society, like divine parents teaching their human offspring. Yes, religion has often got it seriously wrong, too often allying itself with despotic, autocratic power in the interests of social control rather than transformation. And the gods we either discovered or invented were often, or even usually, self-seeking, venal, judgmental, vengeful, or just plain useless. But broker the metanoia in human life, they seem to have nevertheless more or less successfully actually done, because we do see, as I've just described, the metanoia actually happening in human life. And as I will get to shortly, we see it happening also in the gradual historical development of democratic culture and society. Can you see, therefore, that this is real evidence for, in fact, is tantamount to a proof of the existence of some sort of capital G God as the selfless cooperation teacher of humanity? No mere projection of the human psyche could have possibly pulled that off. So I'm afraid to say Somewhere among the many gods of historical religion, many or even most of whom almost certainly never existed, it seems to be the case that there must be some sort of real God who does. Faith in such a God, this is what religion invariably teaches, like the faith and trust a child needs to have in their parents, seems to be the only thing that can empower us to undergo real metanoia, to change deep down, to overcome both our natural born selfishness, sin, and the real evil that exists in the culture around us. My contention, in fact, and this is for another presentation, obviously, so I'll just throw it in here for you to think about, is that the real God we're looking for is historically most directly and fully presented in the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Not, dare I say it, in the God of Christianity, however, heaven forbid, who is a sort of unholy mixture of Jesus' God with the judgmental creator God of the Old Testament. Jesus' God, the loving divine parent, is in there somewhere, I think, but well hidden, almost neutered by the old God. Which brings me now, finally, to the fourth level I want to talk about, the societal level. The twin problems we face, the deadly duo, are, as we've seen, individual sin and collective evil. So, yes, metanoia is something we have to do together as communities, societies, the human race as a whole. Social, cultural transformation to more just, democratic ways of living together based on acknowledgement of basic human rights and selfless cooperation. You know, there's a tendency these days to blame all our woes on civilization or empire, from the empires of the ancient world to the Roman, to the British, to now the so-called American empire, lately under Trump, with their companion evils in modern times, colonialism and capitalism. The notion is that it all started with the so-called Neolithic revolution around 10,000 BCE, the critical transition from nomadic hunting and gathering to sedentary farming and domestication of animals, the birth of early civilizations in the great river valleys. As if everything was wonderful before that, and civilization ruined everything, normalizing violent control of the masses of people by kings, emperors, despots, ruling classes. But no, before that, things were even worse, much worse. Remember Darwinism, survival of the fittest, eat or be eaten, everyone for themselves and nature against all. That's where we've come from. We are evolved animals, not created somehow perfect, and then we fell. The idea, the possibility of not doing that, of selflessly cooperating with each other rather than just eating ourselves into extinction, is always a new thing coming into the world. Homo sapiens, in fact, is the first species even capable of intentional, selfless cooperation. So, yes, there is a gradual capital M metanoia transformation occurring in human society and culture, from the survival of the fittest, where we started out, to civilization and age of empires, to modern democratic culture and society. Selfless cooperation with each other is the essential element of democracy. We choose freely to set aside our self-interest at the appropriate time when it's needed in favour of the interests of others, of the community, society, even of our species as a whole. How are we going with that, by the way, the historical development of democracy? Well, I noted earlier on threats to democracy as part of our current polycrisis. Yes, threats both from within and without. You often hear the results of opinion surveys these days pointing to the fact that trust in democracy and democratic institutions is decreasing or even at all-time lows. Democracy is often described as fragile, as if we are liable to descend into universal tyranny any day now. But what alternative is there but to keep working to protect and improve it, to keep putting our faith, trust, and belief in democracy at all cost, at all costs. So, to now wrap up this presentation before we get to some question time, the main thing I've set out to do today is to focus our attention on the absolute urgency of the metanoia as I define it, individual and collective transformation to a more selfless, democratic way of life. And its problematic nature, the fact that we simply can't find the wherewithal inside ourselves to undergo it. No purely humanistic approach will do, in other words, no matter how courageous and well-intentioned. Only through faith in something or someone outside ourselves does it become realistically achievable. That something or someone in each of our lives individually is, uncontroversially, our parents, teachers, and other parties who might show an interest in us. For humanity collectively, however, as I've tried to show, that someone or something appears to be some sort of really existing God, perhaps the loving divine parent whom Jesus presents, certainly not the old creator God of traditional religion, including Christianity. Yes, shock horror, a God who really exists, not a figment of our imagination, not some sort of immaterial life force, a God who even the most ardent of atheists might, I dare say, actually not mind if they existed. Happy days. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening. Before I hand back to David for questions and comments, here's the book slide one more time. Also, my new project, New Romans, which you can see there, which you can find out about and start reading. So feel free to scan the QR code on the screen, which will take you to my website where you'll find information about the book and lots of other goodies. But I'll just leave that there for a moment. But now back to you, David.
Good. Well, thank you for the presentation, Fergus. Now, before we throw the meeting open to questions, comments, and discussion with Fergus, I have a couple of announcements. The first of which is that the next SoFiA Zoom session will take place in 1 month's time on Saturday, the 27th of June. But if you're in North America, of course, that's the Friday evening prior. And Dr. Carlos Murillo is speaking on liberation theology. Oh, Carlos is with us today. I can see him waving there. Now, our SoFiA Zoom sessions are hosted on the Meetup platform of the Existentialist Society, and they have weekly events. And to find the topics and the Zoom links for those events, I've just put the Existentialist Society's Meetup, the link to their Meetup platform, in the chat. Now, for our questions, comments, and discussion session, we'll use the raised hand method so I can get you in turn. And for those who don't know, the raising hand icon is in the React tab at the bottom of your screen. So, Neville, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, David. And thank you very, very much to our speaker. I find this very interesting, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So my question is simply, how you're defining metanoia. In my mind, because I work on cognition, sociology, and cognition histories, I see it as somewhat of a connector between clinical psychology and social psychology. And the social psychology is probably what I more lean into. But for me, there is no conflict. So I was wondering, in your theology, how you connect the individual to a universal God, to the big picture.
What a great question. I'm not sure I've got a great answer to it, Neville. And really, it's a $64,000 question. I mean, historically, religious participation and involvement has been the cultural form, institution, in which people have been able to participate. But as I've said, religion has been really part of the problem. Historically made itself more part of the problem than the solution. So, my own work, I'm involved. I'm heavily involved with the Uniting Church here in Adelaide. I work for an organisation called the Effective Living Centre, and we run a bunch of programs and events.
I'm familiar with that, because I was there at the Charles at Marion's book launch on Charles Strong.
Marion's book launch on Charles Strong. That was
2 years back. Yeah,
definitely. Wonderful. So I had my own church involvement, and I ply my trade doing casual lay preaching around uniting churches in the southern part of Adelaide, and certainly, so for me, my main work is focused with attempting to bring about a real change or transformation in Christianity, so that it actually gets away from the aspects of Christianity which tend to obscure, to hide, to vitiate real metanoia going on in individual people's lives. So all my writing, my preaching, my work with the Effective Living Centre is focused on that. I seriously, I'd love to say that it's the Christian church which can lead the way in this, but it's done such a terrible job of it historically. And in fact, it's probably gone in the opposite direction mostly, and actually got in the way of real transformation, social and cultural, so individual and then social and cultural transformation. But I live in hope, and in terms of my own personal efforts in this direction, that's where I'm focusing it, as well as talking to groups generally, to people who have no connection or interest in church. But I think the way to go, the direction, as I said in the presentation, the important way, the absolute essential element of it is through faith. We've got to find faith in and live by faith in something outside of ourselves, because the attempt to find the wherewithal to undergo real metanoia inside ourselves is an exercise in futility, and we're probably only going to be digging ourselves into an even bigger hole. Don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. You and I are basically within the same sort of scoping. I'm
Mm,
working with United Church folk here
yeah,
in Brisbane, and and your Metanoia is very much in line with my work in cognition, historically and sociologically.
lovely. Good on you, Neville. Thank you.
Les, it's your turn.
Oh, thanks, David. And thanks, Fergus. I remember seeing you, it must be a few years ago now, at one of David's groups. So thanks for coming back. It's really good. And of course, I'm on board with a lot of where you see the end point is, respect for human rights, and of course, wanting democratic institutions where all of our collective interests are satisfied. So I'm very much on board with the end point, and so are so is humanists and humanism more generally. Um, I had an initial question before I went on to a bit more commentary on your talk. And I think you've answered most of it. I was going to ask you whether you were a minister, because from memory you are, and you still are a minister within the Uniting Church. I was going to ask you whether you had any relationship with the Progressive Christian Network, because you seem to be very much in line with um, that kind of Christianity that eschews the transcendent God and the supernaturalism. Have you had any relations with the Progressive Christian Network?
Yeah, no, thank you, Les. And it was just last year, by the way, when I presented on this network, I reckon. Although it seems like years ago. I'm not a minister. I'm not a United Church minister. I'm a lay preacher. Heaven forbid anyone should. I should give anyone the impression that I'm a Uniting Church minister. And yes. I'm a member and have been for many years of the Progressive Christianity Network in South Australia. We run monthly events called Progressive Christianity Forum, and we have a great array of speakers. Next month or the month after next, we have Lorraine Parkinson zooming in to a live audience here in Adelaide from Melbourne. And I'll be doing a presentation myself later in the year in that. So I've been closely involved with the Progressive Christianity for a number of years now. So that answers that part of your question.
Oh, great. Thanks. And I'm really impressed with people like you and Paul Tonson trying to demythologize, de-theisticize, de-supernaturalize Christianity. So I'm very much in admiration of the work that you do. And as I said, I agree with the end point. I think my biggest qualm is, to put it bluntly, I suppose, the hero worship. Two things. One is you've kept from traditional Christianity that there's something wrong with us individually. And this is where I disagree about your evolutionary take, that we are by nature selfish and we need the external cultural forces and influence to bring out the selfless aspects. And there I disagree, because I think we're also biologically tuned to act altruistically as well. So it's both. Which, to go back to that point, that there's something wrong with us. We are broken. We are natural. Each of us is naturally selfish, and we need to look to something outside. And this is where, of course, you've kept a very traditional part of Christianity. And that thing outside is the hero. And in your case, it's Jesus, of course, because you were brought up as a Christian, like my good friend Paul Tonson. So you want to keep the Jesus stories and Jesus as the hero, the father that we need to look up to. And that's probably one of my big qualms, in that story, aspiring to that hero Jesus, I think you're going to have a really, really hard time making that a universal or a universalist message, because the Muslims won't be happy because they'll be looking towards Muhammad. The traditional Jews won't be happy because they're looking towards Abraham and Moses. And of course, the Hindus won't be happy because they'll be looking towards Brahman and Shiva as the hero. So the different religions have their own heroes. And that's where I think, I suspect the limitation of your message, as good as it is going to receive practical limitations in that you're going to have to overcome generations in the case of Hinduism, thousands of years of acculturation in a different hero. And I know you had a go at humanism in your talk, and that's where I think the strength of humanism is. It's not saying you've got to aspire to this hero or this hero or this hero. You can pick whatever hero you like, but what unites us, what the driving force towards altruism is our collective interest, is our collective humanity. And I want to include animals in there as well. So I think that's where the big challenge, as much as I like your story, I think that's where the big challenge is with your aspiring to a hero. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Les. My view of sin, firstly, I'm always tremble when I actually, I try and melodramatize it when I use it. The dreaded S word, sin, capital SIN. In all my work with churches, with congregations, it's almost the first thing I'm trying to disrupt the traditional Christian view of what sin is. And the traditional Christian view of sin, as I said in the talk, was that it's about disobedience to this judgmental old creator God who's in the business of laying down a whole lot of rules and regulations. And when we disobey him, he's virtually always a he, then that's what sin is. And my message is always that, no, that's not what sin is, if only because that God just don't exist. Anyway, what sin is natural-born human selfishness. Now, then people will say, and I've had this conversation many times, oh, but Fergus, you've still got the original sin there, even though you've changed the nature of it, perhaps. It's still an original sin that we're naturally born with. Now, the answer to that is yes and no. Yes, it is a natural thing, and all humans, and I've had a bunch of children myself, and now got a bunch of grandchildren. So, and a lot of my recent work has been based on my observations, and then I spent a long career, 30 or 40 years, teaching teenagers in school. Help. So when I say the selfishness is a natural. All humans are born with a natural propensity for self-centeredness. Now, it's a natural propensity which will inevitably become sin once the child starts to develop some degree of self-consciousness. And in particular, it's by age 2 that it really, around age 2, the terrible 2s, that it really starts to manifest. Now, so what I would say is that no, little babies when they're first born, that's not sin. They are totally self-absorbed, but that's not sin. It's not yet sin. It's only as the child's self-consciousness starts to observe, and they start to, and typically it seems to cut in almost suddenly by about age 2 with little children, that's when they start to develop real willfulness, intentional willfulness behavior. And then inevitably when it goes wrong, they have these amazing, fascinating tantrums, which I've observed recently a lot because I'm a grandparent and I don't have to deal with it directly. So it's been a remarkable phenomenon to really start to understand in a new way. So no, it's not like we're born with an original sin, this indelible black spot on our souls, which comes from our primordial parents, if only because we didn't have any primordial parents. There was no Adam and Eve and any historical fall at all. It's just this natural-born self-absorption, which almost inevitably, as the child grows and starts to develop self-consciousness, morphs into an amazing propensity for real intentional selfishness, which I call sin. Now, so that's the first thing about sin, and I'm forever trying to explain that to people, because yes, when as soon as I use the S word, people think, oh, here we go, it's the old original sin bulldozed again. Now, as to the hero, Jesus, and yes, other religions have heroes. For me, the proof is in the pudding. Somewhere deep inside Christianity, Christian doctrine, somewhere deep inside the Gospels and the New Testament, I believe firmly is, and it's pretty well hidden in a lot of cases. I believe there is the real Jesus and the real teachings of Jesus, which focus on the big thing that he talked about all the time was the kingdom, and so the core content of all Jesus, this sort of hidden Jesus, because it's like there's several Jesuses in the New Testament, in the Gospels and New Testament, because a whole lot of stuff's been added since. And by the way, my project called New Romans, and I think the process of transforming Jesus into someone else, in other words, Jesus into the Christ of Christianity, probably started with Paul. And so I'm trying to dig back beneath the old letter to the Romans to find a new truth, to get back to the original Jesus. Somewhere in there, there is not so much a hero, but it's the teachings. It's the teachings about selfless living in community, which shine through, particularly in the parables about the kingdom parables, and I understand the kingdom as basically the metanoia of the whole of humanity, the gradual metanoia of the whole of humanity, which 2,000 years on now, we've made some progress, but there's still obviously a long way to go. I don't see Jesus as a hero, as there's amazing teachings there. Now, the proof's in the pudding for the other religions. Do those other religions, do they deliver the goods in terms of transformation, individual and cultural transformation? And I don't think Christianity delivers the goods. I think that the gospel, which is hidden somewhere inside Christianity, I think that has delivered the goods. The real teachings of Jesus have delivered the goods and inspired people since the time of Jesus, have delivered or started to deliver the goods in development. And the real fruit of it is development of a real democracy, development of modern democracy. I don't think the other religions have delivered the goods, whatever their heroes are and their understandings. They haven't delivered real meta. To me, they have yet to. I don't see them delivering metanoia. It's a terrible thing to say, but you only see the emergence of real democracy and human rights and democracy first through the European Western nations. Yeah, I don't want to call it Christendom, because I think Christianity and the church have almost spent most of the time blocking all that development. It's the gospel that's coming through there. But notwithstanding the fact that maybe the other religions are going to come through, maybe the other heroes are going to come through with the goods, but the proof will be in the pudding. What matters is the outcome. Do they deliver the goods or not? And then finally, about humanism. Humanism, since the Enlightenment and so on, the great humanist project has really had a profoundly positive effect on human society and culture on one hand, but also humanism has brought about some of the great disasters. the humanism in the 20th century with the we've communism and Nazism and fascism and so on. And then into the 21st century, humanism, and by the way, most of the early humanism, correct me if I'm wrong, is mainly inspired not by Christianity, but inspired by the gospel. And it's almost a rejection of Christianity. But what's really going on, I think, is that really the inspiration that comes through, the spiritual inspiration that comes through Jesus and the gospel, through the few humanism. So, but it's in humanism without faith in something, outside of humanity, I think is just either powerless or weak and powerless, or bloody dangerous. So I think there's got to be faith and trust and belief in something outside of ourselves to really make humanism work. I mean, I'm really talking about humanism, because I'm trying to avoid talking. I'm rejecting the notion that most or even all religions can be of any use here. Anyway, humanism, faith in something, not just faith in ourselves.
If I could just add very, very quickly, I can see there's a lot of people waiting. The notion that humanism gave rise to German fascism and Italian fascism and Stalinist communism, that's just completely untrue. I've got a book coming out, Harari's Humanist Wars of Religion. Yuval Harari is the biggest disseminator of this nonsense that humanism led to the totalitarian catastrophes. Complete nonsense. And I do a complete deconstruction of Harari. So that's coming out. The two things briefly. The notion that you can find democracy in the sayings of Jesus, you've got to look extremely hard. I don't think they're there. I mean, Christianity gave us, 1,700 years of monarchic theocracy, 1,700 years of monarchic theocracy. The modern democratic state only came about with the separation of the church and state, with the US Constitution, of course, and the French Revolution that expressly separated the religious powers from the secular powers, the powers of the state. So I don't think it's there. And there might be some gems, ethical gems, moral gems, if you look hard enough, as you say, in the Gospels. But then again, the Hindus say that about their texts. There are a lot of moral gems in the Upanishads and the Rig Veda. There's moral gems in Buddhism. I mean, Buddhism has their 6 rights, which are 6 moral rules for living. That's in Buddhism. And of course, Daoism, and of course, Mohammedanism, Islam, all of these have their moral gems. So once again, there's nothing special about the gems that are in the Gospels from Jesus' sayings. And I think, once again, that's the big hurdle you're going to face in convincing the people of the other religions that the Jesus gems are bigger gems or more genuine gems than the Hindu gems and the Buddhist gems and the Muslim gems and the Aboriginal religion gems. So thanks, Fergus.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, by the way, your piece that you're doing contra Harari in relation to humanism giving rise to Nazism, fascism, etc. So do let us know when that comes out.
Okay. It'll be on Amazon, but I'll send out messages when it's released.
That'd be great.
Thanks, Fergus.
Thank you, Les. Dave, go ahead.
Thank you, Brother Dave. Fergus, I very much enjoyed the presentation. I completely agree. Our problem, our society, these skills of respect, consideration, that in human interaction, we've only been working on for 2,000 years or 5,000 years, depending on how you count. I come from a family of school teachers, so of course I think the solution is education. Um, Here in the United States of America, we have about a 9-month school year. I think the magic number is 180 days, and 6 hours a day is plenty. Of course, we're competing against folks in Asia, and I don't know what your school day looks like, but I think a lot of Asia, it's 8, 10, 12-hour days that kids are growing and educating. Um, but as I said, I've always had an interest, even though I'm an engineer, work for the phone company. But they always say, well, leave all these social things, leave that to the churches. You leave that, just keep that out of the schools. But not everybody goes to church. And the thing is, now we're in a multicultural society, you have different religions, and I think we fight against teaching any particular religion. I think with good reason. We don't want to get into that business. And the other comment I would make, I remember one of your slides, you say, well, the parents will fix all this stuff. Well, I was very active in the divorce recovery program for a number of years, and we have a lot of defective families. And for my studying about the penal system, a lot of our criminals came from disturbed families. But so I think that's a big reason we need to start teaching these social skills in school. And the other thing, I was an instructor at a training center for the phone company. Lecture is terrible because we aren't monoliths. We're all individuals. And of course, I think we need to take advantage of the model of the video game and build the education into the video game. And it can be self-paced, and the teacher can be a coach. And then also the class, I believe, should read a lot of biographies. And I think I remember my school year, we did read some great classic literature. Now it's, classic movies and documentaries that they need to have some way to have all this class watch it all together at different times, but get together and discuss the importance of teamwork. Now, it's obvious in sports, but in a lot of other things, we think, well, as your slides are saying, well, heck with me, all for me and heck with everybody else. And I'll rely on the non well-trained people to be my employees and pay them poop, and I'll make all the profits. But I wish us all well. It's about time we make some major changes. But anyway, this was a good discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dave. And yes, my picture of the God who exists, whose primary quality, and in fact the only thing I can find any evidence for in relation to their existence, is a selflessness teacher. So people often say to me, well, you would invent a God who was a teacher, Fergus, wouldn't you? Because obviously I've had a long career in teaching. So yes, all good. The solution is education. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, one other thing I'd raise quickly, because we have a thing here in the States that we don't want to give anything to anybody because they'll just be lazy and sit around all. We've had several very successful experiments in guaranteed income because we have a terrible problem with wealth disparity, you may be aware, and we need to find a way to transfer wealth from the rich to the poor. And actually, productivity does increase. And if a guy can afford a car, he might be able to get to work. So it's really a benefit to society to give people things sometimes, but it's so counterintuitive. Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you, Dave.
Will, go ahead.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Fergus. Yeah, I'm just interested in what you were saying there about a view that survival of the fittest, if we just go with what nature intended. If I understood this correctly, you're saying that survival of the fittest will lead to just mayhem and brutality. So I might have misunderstood that, but I just wanted to clarify that when Charles Darwin was talking about survival of the fittest, it means survival of the most adaptable, the one who can adapt to their environment. So that's what fitness means in an evolutionary sense, is adaptability. And altruism has been selected for in humans. It's quite apparent that we are naturally altruistic, some more than others. We're certainly altruistic to those of our closest relationship genetically. And this is just nature at work, because the altruism is born of the DNA molecule and the propensity for certain behaviors to be expressed as conducive to the DNA molecule being proliferated. So if helping your family is in the best interest of your DNA, then you will enact behaviors that help your family. And then the next one from the family are our closer friends, and then our extended societal circles, and outward we go. But I'd say that most of our behavior is just a will to power. And I find it, from an evolutionary perspective, I mean, this is a fascinating thing about human evolution, and, to consider that we've been the Homo sapiens mons for the last 200,000 years. And our factory settings, as some biologists refer to our suite of human emotions, were selected long before we arrived on the scene. So most of what we do is biological determinism, which was, Homo sapiens has been on the planet for roughly 200,000 years. And prior to that, our ancestors were engaged in behaviors that were or were not being selected for as conducive to survival. And a lot of those behaviors are violent. We are an extremely violent species, but we can also be an extremely altruistic species. As you see in all other species, they can be violent, they can be altruistic. It's all in the best interest of the DNA molecule. And that's where the real wonder and fascination and mystery is in that DNA molecule. So I highly recommend you have a look at the DNA molecule. But just ironically to me, people claiming that they have divine revelation, this is a will to power. When you can clearly see that otherwise intelligent people believe fairy tales, literally believe fairy tales, because it's a will to power. And that's what fascinates me about these meetings, hearing intelligent people espousing all sorts of views that really are not based in any evidence whatsoever. And as a member of the species, and also fallible, I'm just fascinated by that aspect of our nature. So I'll leave it there. Good luck with your projects, and thanks again.
Well, thank you, Will. And I agree with virtually everything you say. And yes, most people's claims of divine revelation is a will to power. As it is not. In other words, it's their own basic ego trip. You said that altruism has been selected. Yes. And, some of the most recent evidence shows that one reason that Homo sapiens sort of won the race over Neanderthals is that Homo sapiens seem to be better at being able to form together into larger groups. So they were better at selfless cooperation, forming into groups. So it's one reason, and that has been put forward as one reason why, yes, altruism the fact that the human race has survived. Humans are the most powerful of all creatures. Not because we're necessarily the most physically powerful, but because of our intelligence. And in other things I write, I focus on the fact that we are capable of self-consciousness, which turbocharges. So it makes us the most powerful creatures on the planet, but it also simultaneously makes us a positive danger to ourselves and to every other species. So yes, The fact that we've survived means that the altruism has been selected. Somehow selflessness has got into human life, has got into, as you say, our genes, because it's able to be transmitted from one generation to another. Whether it will be enough to get us over the current hump with this amazing polycrisis, as people call it, all the things going haywire at the moment, is another question. But one of the points I made was, and I'm a huge fan of Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, so I get all that. But one of the points I made was that if there seems to be a contradiction involved in thinking that that altruism, selfless cooperation, which is intentional and conscious, seems to be a contradiction involved in saying that that could be genetically determined. In other words, determined or biologically, genetically determined, for example, by a genetic change or mutation. Because if something is just driven by our biology, by our genetics, then it's not conscious or intentional, and it could only ever mimic real selflessness. Now, in reality, of course, there's plenty of mimicking of real selflessness out there in the world. If you look at the phenomenon of nationalism, for example, to take an example, a nation can seemingly selflessly cooperate, all the individual citizens cooperate very selflessly together, make great sacrifices for each other and for the good of the nation. But there's a little, to me, it's a mimicking of real selfless cooperation, because it doesn't go any further than the nation or the tribe or the team, for example. And it inevitably leads the nation or the tribe or the team down a path of self-destruction, because it's a mimicking. There's lots of altruism that looks like altruism, that is biologically or genetically determined, but it's not the real thing. It's a mimicking of it. Real selfless, I can't see how something that is conscious and intentional selflessness could possibly be could ever be biologically or genetically determined. I mean, and that was one of the reasons why I eventually looked to some outside intervention to actually bring that about. Yes, but yes, you're right. Altruism seems to have been selected, although a large part of that component of that altruism, I think, is the mimicking. It's not the real thing. It's not real selflessness. Anyway, thanks for
thanks for that. Thanks very much. I much appreciate. Great answer. Thank you. I'm just thinking, you've got me thinking about like free will, actually. If like
that's right. Yeah.
It's just biological determinism, then perhaps we have free will to overcome just that natural disposition to be altruistic. Yeah. Well, you got me thinking.
That's spot on. That's spot on. You expressed it beautifully. It's the ultimate. Real selflessness is the quintessential free act. Quintessential free.
Beyond biological determinism. Right. You got me thinking. Thank you very much.
So setting free, it's a liberation of the biologically determined world.
Interesting.
Thank you. That's great.
George, your turn.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say that, what you don't mention at all in your discussion, and I think it's a real lacuna in what you're noting, is capitalism. And that capitalism is a system by design. It is not a fault, it is a feature of the system. Fosters greed, fosters indeed narcissism, self-centeredness. And that there is no true solidarity in the context of capitalism. Indeed, of course, to say that Nazism is humanism I mean, forgive me, but no rational person would argue that. I mean, Nazism is the rejection of humanism, right? It is the elevating of the myth and the lie and the fantasy of the Aryan race above all other humans, right? And Stalinism, unless is absolutely correct. I mean, that had absolutely nothing to do with humanism. I mean, that's all palatial politics within the context of the Soviet Union. Now, one thing I will say to you, and I was noting at the, when we first came on, you may not have, I think you were there. We're talking about how I was sort of mistreated at the end of a meeting on Friday with what I consider to be right-wing Christians, and where they got truly apoplectic, is what I pointed out to them, that in fact of the matter, Jesus, and I'd say this without any sense of hyperbole at all, Jesus engages unequivocally Marxist analysis. Jesus says, now hold on a second, let me just get it. I posted it and now I got so lost in the post. Jesus said in effect, that those that pursue wealth, he says, I'm going to read this to you in full. Please allow me this. As for the rich and the this is 1 Timothy 6:17-9. As for the rich in the present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in works. Oh, no. God, hold on a second. That's not the one I wanted. Give me a quick second. This is really important. Okay, this is it. 1 Timothy 6:9. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction, right? So the pursuit of wealth as being corrosive and destructive to the community, right? So, I mean, this selfishness that you speak of is not at all genetic. It is a system that says either you feast or famine, either you make significant money and you're one of the few, or you and your family suffer, struggle, maybe even die. And so, capitalism pits us against one another. And so I'm just saying that I know that you're very sincere in what you're saying, but that capitalism, and Jesus said, money is the root of all evil. So, what I'm saying is that in the words of Jesus, and it's funny because when I was quoting this last night, I was actually accused of being the devil, the voice of the devil, for quoting Jesus directly, right? So I submit to you that to really close the circle of your argument, you point to Jesus and you say the rich and their aspirations, their false aspirations, are destructive to society, they're destructive to the human soul, and they're leading us collectively and individually towards damnation, either literally or figuratively.
Thank you, George. And it got that wonderful picture of the great man himself staring at me while you were saying all that, of whom I'm a big fan, by the way. And in terms of Jesus engaging with Marxist analysis, I reckon next week when Carlos is going to speak on liberation theology, I reckon we'll probably get a bit of that. Yes, Nazism, and for that matter, Stalinism, and this harkens back to something that Les said. Yes, I see them as really distorted forms of humanism, and yes,
can I say something? There's no way, shape, or form. There's no way, shape, or form that Hitler is a humanist. He's the anti-humanist, anti-enlightenment.
Yes, well, he loves humanity, but for Hitler, the humanity he loves is basically himself and his idolization of himself as the German people. But so it's a distorted.
So it's not humanism.
Yeah. So it's a very distorted form of humanism, as is Stalinism, and you wouldn't want to say that they're the same things. The humanism that gives rise to democracy and human rights in the modern era, and the sort of humanism that leads to pathological forms like Nazism and Stalinism. The one thing they do have in common, however, is putting their faith in humanity alone to be able to pull itself up by its own bootstraps without any help. But yes, the two things are chalk and cheese, and yes. And thank you for quoting the 1 Timothy and reminding us, yes, of Jesus, money is the root of all evil. There's no doubt about that. And I look forward to hearing more from Carlos next week on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Lynn, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, David. And Fergus, and I'm very grateful hearing your presentation. There was one thing that I did want to question, how you could not see the statement by Jesus that the kingdom of God is within you. So my question is, what have you done with that in your own thinking? I was really excited to hear from Les and Will, because I think I'm on the same page as them. And I think that my journey has led me through to away from enough to be inclusive, not exclusive, not somehow we're the best religion, we've got it, Jesus is the best hero or whatever, but that humanists have got something that is okay, as well as everybody else who's got something that's okay, because I do think that I'm inclined to think that it's in our DNA to see that we have divinity within us, as much as we have anything else within us. The opposite, we have divinity in us, and I think we're pretty slow to hear that that's what Jesus was saying. We have a divine Father, in his view, divine parent. Thank you for that better correction, within us, and it's evolving as time goes on. And I do think you see it in little children from the beginning. I think they give us the trust because that's what it takes. We have to, at some stage, give trust to other people to teach us and make us better people, make us not unhappy when we're mean to the kids in the playground, and so on and so on. So I'll stop there, but I do want to hear that you're making something of Jesus's comment, because I think he was great in saying and leading us to think that the divine, the kingdom, is within us. It's changed my life to think that way. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, thank you so much, Lynn. The kingdom of God is within us is the title of Tolstoy's book. I can't remember it's the English translation of the Russian title of one of Tolstoy's short book that Tolstoy wrote in the latter part of his life, I think. Not a fictional story. It's a big statement by him on Christianity. Now, and I can't remember the scripture reference of where Jesus says it, but when you investigate it, the word, and I'm not going to be able to find my notes on it very quickly, but the word for within, which is sometimes translated as within, also means among. So some scholars say that really the translation should be the kingdom of God is among you. In other words, in between you, in community. So
that's true.
Yeah.
too. I totally accept that it means individually and communally, and that's why we have.
Yeah.
That's why the early Christians wanted to form a community that encouraged us all to be living in a raised state of being, and does require us to have a metanoia. Thank you again for focusing on this part, the transformation that I think all of us have to go through, but not to come through from the only sinful human being to something outside of us that makes us better, but something that recognizes the divinity within us, the altruism, if you like, and encourages it, changes us from within.
Yeah, and that, and in terms of Jesus and the gospel, that divinity that can come within us, and which I have no doubt can be transmitted and evolved from generation to generation. But in terms of altruism and metanoia, that the normal way of thinking about where that divine spark, that divinity within us comes from, is through the Spirit, and of course,
sure.
So it's a spiritual transformation. So regardless of whether what Jesus was actually saying, the kingdom of God is among you rather than within you, there's no doubt that post Jesus, and now we're getting into some sort of gospel stuff. I know this is not necessarily a Christian forum here, but that divine spark that gets in us does come in through the Holy Spirit, and yes, and involved. And yes, I've got 7.5 little grandchildren, so yes, I'm fully aware of that divine spark, but it does need some real nurturing, intentional nurturing.
And education and belonging to a community that is focusing on love and all those wonderful things. Is how it grows. That's how it grows.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Neville, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to point out principles are principles. Some people don't know the definitions of words. Principles are suggestive. God, I just get so annoyed about the amateur philosophers that they at some point they stop their research and they're not in long life learning. So no, this wasn't what I was going to say. Fergus, have you do you know Greg Jenks and his
yes
book? Yeah, and his book, Jesus Then and Jesus Now. Now, this audience will not know that work, and Greg has got a group together actually now that we're looking at his book again. So I think it might be helpful for you to explain this to this audience. You say hidden, and in a sense, in the public marketplace, it is hidden, but it is pretty formative in biblical scholarship, the understanding that we have of Jesus, which is an antithetical to Christianity in the way that it has historically developed. Do you want to sort of comment on that sort of end of it? I think it might just help people here who've never done any research in religion, never done any research in biblical studies, and the amateur philosophers. So maybe my beginning of my spiel here is formative, because this is the problem we have. We have too many amateur philosophers who are trying to address your expertise and haven't bothered to do the work. So do you want to talk about the Jesus of the Jesus tradition in terms of contemporary biblical studies? Please, I think it'll be informative.
The Search for the Historical Jesus, but that's not the name of the Greg Jenks books. I haven't read any Greg Jenks books. What I was saying was that I'm familiar with the name.
Yeah. He has his own within that Jesus tradition, and the Robert Funk Jesus Seminar movement. He has his own particular interpretation of who Jesus was. But I think it might help get rid of some of these silly nonsense statements where people are just blanketing, comments about Christianity, comments about religion, comments about, the Jesus tradition. I think people would understand. They need that sort of pre-learning knowledge. Do you want to try and elaborate on that?
And the other more recent book, which I've really enjoyed in this regard, is the Lorraine Parkinson book, Made on Earth. And in fact, she's presenting at the Effective Living Centre, as I said earlier, via Zoom, and on July the 2nd. But yes, and by the way, as well, on one hand, I do move a lot in progressive Christian circles, but would you believe I also move in very conservative evangelical Christian circles as well? I've got many friends. I had an amazing conversation with a chaplain at a Christian school the other day, and he invited them onto my website to check out some of the stuff that I've written in this area, and so I'm looking forward to some more conversations with him coming up. But yeah, the key to it, I think, is that because as you say, as soon as you start talking about any question that any of the Gospels or any part of the New Testament it can't be taken on complete face value as literally true, then a certain type of person is going to freak out completely, and they're just as likely to never talk to you again unless you're very careful. So how do I overcome that? And when I'm moving in these sort of circles, it's by always bringing everything back to making sure people that bring them back to a real focus on the reality of Jesus, which I believe can be found deeply buried, but sometimes right on the surface in the New Testament, in the Gospels, in the New Testament. But yes, it's very hard to get beyond people's freak out with any question, and I've probably lost some friends over it. But conversely, I find that in talking in progressive Christian circles, they typically think I'm as crazy as the conservatives think I am in this regard, because to me there is a kernel of not just Jesus being, and it goes back to what we were talking about with Les's question. There is a sense, in my view, that there is something unique and special about Jesus and Jesus' teachings. Is something unique, and as I said, the proof is eventually in the pudding, and what the impact of Jesus' teachings, in spite of all the shenanigans of the church historically, the impact of Jesus' teachings in the world have been profound. I'm aware now I'm not answering your question at all, Neville. Why don't you just repeat it so I can just give a more fulsome response to what your actual question was.
Oh, wait a minute. There we go. Unmute yourself, Neville.
Yes, well, I muted myself to begin with, and then David decided to make it permanent. Look, I think I'm not a biblical scholar, but I am a historian in the contemporary period, and I think the trouble is that there are a lot of apologists, both humanist, Christian, humanist, atheist, humanist, agnostic. There's different. Les and I, of course, have had lots of conversation about variants of humanism. So, but the problem is in the public. This is a public marketplace. You and I, people like David, people like Les, we have these expertise where we can have very sharp, to the point questions. But the trouble is, at this historical conjuncture, the Jesus tradition on the margins is not understood, and there are certain populist sort of signals. There's signs, I think, in Charles Peirce's sort of theory, like Jesus Christ Superstar or Godspell, that people can lock on, and to which they then think, well, Jesus may have not been a bad person. The Christian religion is horrible, but Jesus may not be a bad person. So there's sort of shallow populist signs. And what I'm saying is that, it's that communication problem that you were talking about. I, too, involved with evangelicals. I think I'm still a member of the Evangelical Historians Association, but I've written a recent paper called, How Liberal Can Evangelicalism Be or Become? So, yes, it's not just simply, the thing that we are losing friends within the in-group. The trouble is the communication problem, in the wider public marketplace, where there is just a lack of understanding.
Yeah. Sorry, have you finished?
Whoopsies. Neville's muted himself again.
Yes, I have finished. I mean, I work on, Habermas's the application of Habermas's theory about communicative action. So, I think, this is something that we as scholars who are bringing a very strange message to the public marketplace have to wrestle with. What are the sort of actions we need to make to be able to penetrate in a great public ignorance?
Yeah. So that's the $64,000 question I ask myself almost daily. Neville, how do I get through? Get through to not just what is now a small minority of the population who've got any interest at all in Christianity, progressive or conservative, but how do I get there to the big wide world out there? All my children, for example, have long since abandoned, even though I brought them up as good little Christian kiddies, they've long since abandoned anything to do with Christianity or church, and I dare not even mention the J word to them. So I'm always looking for other ways of other ways of communicating, and really the hostility of the vast majority of the world to the sorts of things that I'm wanting to communicate. The fact that we can't do it on our own, and there has to be, we have to find faith in a it's such an outrageous thing these days to even suggest that there's a really existing God out there. The hostility is palpable, but so that's the question I'm asking myself all the time, and I'd love someone to give me the answer. Give me a great answer other than the one that I've got, the little bits and pieces that I do myself. Thank you.
Yes, let's just make a comment. Yes, Greg, the Reverend Dr. Greg Jenks will be addressing SoFiA on one of these sessions in a couple of months' time on his book, Jesus Then, Jesus Now.
Wonderful.
Yes. And you mentioned the Reverend Dr. Lorraine Parkinson and her book on Made on Earth. Well, she gave a précis of that book as a lecture to the Progressive Christian Network way back in 2009. I sent her an email making a request that she present to us here at SoFiA, on that topic, but I had no response. So what's happened is that John Nowak and I have actually read out her article, so at one of our sessions. Just thought bit of incidental. Go on, Les.
Oh, thanks. So 2 quick points, and then I want to get to something more substantive. On Hitler wasn't some kind of wishy-washy humanist because he had regard for humans. That's not what humanism means. Humanism doesn't mean regard for humanity, because if that was the case, Christians and Hindus and Muslims, they would all be humanists, and the word loses all meaning. So Hitler was stridently anti-humanist. He set up a national church called Positive Christianity. He mandated that religion be taught in all schools. Read Mein Kampf. He says that he was following divine providence. I devote 2 chapters to destroying this basically Christian propaganda that Hitler was a humanist. That's one thing. Secondly, on altruism, on what's genuine altruism and what's not. From what I've read, there are 3 kinds of altruism. There's kin altruism, biologically based. Richard Dawkins, A Selfish Gene. The second kind is where you start to introduce some cognitive thought to it, and that's reciprocal altruism. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. And then the third kind is universal altruism. It's not that one is the more real kind or not. We just have to recognize there are different kinds of altruistic behavior. The substantive thing I wanted to say was, Fergus, the solution, because I see your solution is individual based. Basically, there's something wrong with us. We are too self-regarding, and we need to be more other-regarding. Each of us have got an individual problem, and we need to find the teacher, what I call the hero, someone outside of us to teach us. So I class that as an individual kind of solution, an individualist solution. We've got to offer something to every human being, and every human being has to work on their own to solve our collective problem. And I really do think that's not the right way to go. And here I have something in common with George, as much as George and I disagree, that the problem is political and social at the social level, not to be solved by some individualist solution. The problem, and the problems you point out, extremely big problems, the climate crisis, poverty, wealth inequality, strident nationalism, and and denial of rights to women and gay people. These are all really, really big social problems, and they have social political solutions. And how did those problems come about, or how are they perpetuated? It is literally the strong, the rich, and the powerful have captured the democratic institutions. The rich and the powerful have captured the democratic institutions. And I'm talking about the system of lobbying of the rich. I'm talking about gerrymandering. I'm talking about the culture wars, the capturing of education in schools, and most importantly, probably the capturing of the press by the rich and powerful. We all need to get out there, not to find some hero or teacher that's going to fix me because I've got some problem. We've got to get out there on the streets and demonstrate. We've got to go and see our politicians. We've got to go out there and vote. These are institutional social problems that require institutional social solutions, and not some, harking back to the good old days of when some hero walked the earth and we have to mind their teaching. I really do think, I really do think that that's completely the wrong way to go about it. As much as I said before, I'm in total agreement with the end point that we want to get to, in complete agreement with that, just in disagreement with the solution. What's the solution to the problem? Because we've misdiagnosed the problem. And I think the misdiagnosis is there's something wrong with me. I really do think that every person in every country tries to do good. They are at heart a genuine human being that wants to help others. People are basically good, but the systems, the social and political systems, have been captured by the rich and powerful. So the problem is not with me individually, it's the problem with what we have let the rich and powerful do in capturing and running our political institutions and social institutions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Des. And on the topic of the types of altruism, and finishing with the third one, universal altruism, a lot of my work in relation to altruism, selflessness, and so on, has its roots in Bergsonism, in the famous work by Henri Bergson, The Two Sources of Religion and Morality, or Morality and Religion. There's a recent fantastic book, and I'm just looking at my bookshelf to see if I can see it, by an Australian academic from there it is, by Alexandre Lefebvre. Terrible pronunciation. Alexandre Lefebvre, from the University of Sydney. Well, he was in about up to about 7 or 8 years ago, as far as I know, a few years ago. And the book's called Human Rights as a Way of Life. And there was an earlier book by him as well. So, the roots of my understanding of, and it's great that you distinguish kin altruism, reciprocal altruism, and universal altruism, as those three. Now, in my view, and it's built on those earlier, the sort of my Bergsonist background and more recent stuff by fellow Bergsonists in the present day, like Alexandre Lefebvre. Is that those first two altruisms are the mimic, the genetically determined, probably biological. We probably inherit them from our as part of our animalian past. Whereas the third one, the universal altruism, and the beautiful book Human Rights as a Way of Life, really addresses it very closely. It's not an evolutionary work, by the way. It's a work of philosophical work. This open love, which is a different in kind, not just degree, to all the other loves. And the other wonderful writer who addresses this sort of thing is, of course, is C.S. Lewis, with his Four Loves, an amazing book the four loves where he distinguishes between human love, all the different types of human love, philios, philia, storge, etc., and agape. I think you could probably realise where I was going with this. The agape, or as Bergson describes as open love or selfless love, unconditional selfless love. My point of that is that it is it's different in degree and not just kind to any sort of ordinary human love. The sort of, in sporting teams these days, the AFL players and the basketballs talk about being selfless, and you even sometimes hear the coaches or the players sort of chanting to each other, selfless, 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 pass the ball off, hand pass the ball, sort of selflessness for the team. But of course, it's a closed, is what Bergson would describe as a closed love, a limited closed love. It only extends as far as the team, or then the tribe, or then the nation. And that was my example of nationalism, the destructive nationalism, which is so, and C.S. Lewis talks about those other loves, human loves, all of which are mimic real, open, selfless love, and as a result, inevitably lead to the very opposite, to hatred, violence, and self-destruction. So I really want to focus on this very, very distinct universal altruism, which I cannot but see that it could be genetically or biologically determined. So, and the reason, my point about that was to say, well, how does it get into human populations? And yes, I totally agree. It's never purely an individual thing. And the non-individuality of it is expressed in that each individual human being can only undergo metanoia through outside intervention, through intentional teaching by someone else, by another self. And as you go further out into adult life, it's coming through the culture. So it's ultimately definitely a transformation of culture. I don't know about the notion that everyone tries to do good, that they're born innately good. I mean, obviously you'd get that I don't agree with that humans are born innately good, but then the rich and powerful come and take it away. That sounds to me like an old creation fall notion. And who's going to be the hero then? That's where the hero thing comes in. Although it's a upside down sort of hero with Jesus, he's actually got to die to solve the problem. But to me, to say that, and yes, this is probably a Marxist view, and I've got so much sympathy, and it's my natural. It's where I start out in life. The wanting to believe that every person is born with some innate goodness, capable of some innate goodness, but then the rich and powerful. I just don't buy that. I think that's old. In an amazing sense, that's old school creationism. I'm sorry, that probably sounds like a terrible thing to accuse you of. Anyway, there you go.
I don't think people are born innately good. I think they're born a mix of innately good and innately bad, and it mixes. It varies depending on the person, depending on their genetic constitution. Some people are more other regarding, and other people are more self-regarding. So there's genetic variability there. So I don't think people are born innately good. We're born basically innately bad as well, and that's why the socialization and parenting process is so incredibly important, to bring out that innate goodness and to subdue the innate selfishness. But yeah, no, thanks, Fergus.
Yep.
George, go ahead.
Yes. And I really want to say that I liked a lot of what Les said. It sort of brought a tear to my eye to hear Les speaking in these terms that about the fact that the wealthy are predatory, etc. And I will come back to that. But, you know, at its core, this notion that Hitler was a humanist is absolutely scandalous. And you have to ask yourself why, in terms of your children and in terms of the mass of many, many, many people in the world, and in other words, this affected Christians, etc., right? Why they've turned away from Christianity. I think some of it has to do with this kind of self-serving historiography, right? In other words, when you look at the history of Christianity as a politics, right? Christianity persecuting Jews, persecuting gays, embracing slavery, the 30 Years War. So much criminality has been done under the banner of Christianity, and to this day, Christians carry the banner against abortion. And so, I mean, this and the flip side to this, I'm hearing this analysis, and again, part of this very facile, again, outrageous claim that Hitler's a humanist. Hence, it has sort of blood on its hands, like the Christianity does historically. Again, is a silliness. Now, the other point here is and this is, I'm going to come back to Jesus, right? And that there's an inherent reason, I submit to you, why. Well, in the end, apart from Jesus being a Marxist, which he arguably was, the notion that with poverty, right, sin is born of poverty, right? Women don't turn to prostitution because they aspire to be prostitutes as young women, right? It is because of deprivation. People steal because of deprivation. They turn to crime because of deprivation, right? So to sit here and say, oh, no, the operation of the global political system, the economy, oh, no, we can't hold that responsible for selfishness and greed and cutthroat behavior, right? Again, that kind of analysis, I submit to you, profoundly discredits Christianity. Now, there are liberation theologists, but absent those, right? I mean, the analysis you're giving, talking about solidarity and community and togetherness, but evading capitalism and the role of the billionaire class, right? I mean, basically, you're just talking to yourself when you say these things. There's no inherent broad appeal beyond the narrowly already converted, right? So I'm just saying that, I heard your analysis initially. I'm like, well, if you're not talking about capitalism, there's a big problem. And now I'm listening to you, you're evading capitalism to an extreme degree, as well as trying to put the crimes of Hitler onto humanists, which again is farcical. So, I mean, I know I'm being very pointed in what I'm saying, but at the same time, I would ask you to self-reflect as to why your children in particular, and I mean, not only your children, I mean, you mentioned that yourself, but other people sort of look at Christianity and say, okay, that's not for me. It's not the kind of analysis that's going to give me grounding in terms of understanding reality and allowing me to feel authentic.
Okay, thanks, George. Yes, we keep coming back to Hitler and being a humanist. Now, I'm not sure I wanted to defend what I said about that again. I mean, basically, Hitler was a humanist in the sense that he had faith, trust, not to say interest, solely in himself. It's a sort of idolatry of his own self. So it's a really, I agree, it's a completely distorted form of humanism, and
I don't understand. I have to interject. Can I just interject, please? And I'm being, because I have to say this. How can someone, how could you credibly, and again, I ask you in terms of, don't just say things that again are credibility that really are reflective of reality. How can someone that launches a war of annihilation consciously against Poles, Jews, Soviets, and others, how could that person, to call that person a humanist, you're just smearing humanism. I mean, that's all you're doing. I mean, there's no effort to say, okay, I'm going to understand humanism on its own terms. This is just smearing it, which again, you're trying to salvage Christianity. This is not the way to do it.
Yeah. It might be helpful if we agree on when you say humanism and when I say humanism, we may be talking about different things, or a wider versus a narrower definition. And I agree with everything you've said about Hitler's. I've described it as a very distorted form of humanism, as is Stalinism, as is most isms. And as Les said, Hitler claimed a divine warrant, but I don't believe that Hitler for one moment really believed that, or if he did believe it, that it was anything substantial in his life at all. That in fact he was basically thinking about himself entirely. Now, humanism can mean, a wider definition might mean that your humanist is a rejection of anything else outside of humanity, and saying that we humans have only ourselves to look to, therefore we have to do it all ourselves, and solve all our own problems. Now, that can, so there's a general definition of humanity, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that Hitler or a Stalin might fit that, because they certainly weren't seeing as anything beyond themselves and beyond humanity to draw on, to guide them and then inspire what they were doing. They were basically just getting it out of themselves, out of their own incredibly narcissistic selves. But
let me say this to you.
If you go to a narrow, just let me finish for a moment, just so I can just clarify, George. Sorry, till you're hogging the microphone. A narrow definition of humanism might be one which is a genuinely altruistic humanism, which yes, still believes that we've got to do it ourselves, but which adds to that a humanism which selflessly seeks the genuine good of all, not just the individual, the immediate individual, or the group. So, if I can be so bold as, and yes, and it may be that, for example, a Stalin or a Lenin, those guys, they probably they might well have described themselves as humanists, as atheist humanists. But yeah, that's a very distorted form of humanism.
Stalinism. Let me say this. Stalinism, again, palatial politics, right? But and again, a criminal in his own way. But Hitler, let me put it this way to you. Christianity thinks that humans have to solve their own problems too. They're not pagans, right? They don't think that God intervenes. They don't put God as the head of state, right? Christians think that humans are responsible for society and for this planet, right? The claim is, of course, is that they're looking to God for inspiration. But unless you're a pagan, right, which believes that the gods walk amongst us, there's really broadly no one that really believes that the gods themselves are going to solve our problems. So in this way, what you're saying is that humanism is everything, hence it's nothing, right? Humanism is the idea that all humans have dignity and self-worth, and that we should strive to elevate the whole of humanity, right? Now, you may want to argue something else. I mean, because that ultimately takes the mantle away from Christianity. So you're trying to argue humanism is something else, but that is humanism. That is humanism, right? Now, it's not it's not incontinent with, or it's not necessarily in opposition to a deist, really clear-minded deist, a private conception of Christianity, but it certainly is in opposition to a theocratic conception, right? Because in the end, the Christians are going to be for their team, right? I mean, the Christians are going to be, yes, we need to prioritize the Christian community. I mean, that's what's fundamental. I mean, that's one of the fundamentally wrong stances that devolves from Christian theocracy, is that it is an in-group, out-group kind of reasoning, right? And that is not humanist, right? Because then you're not talking about all humans, you're only talking about quote unquote Christians.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think you and I agree completely on just about all this, George. But we're struggling over having putting different meanings to certain words. On your definition of humanism, which does say yes, we've got to do it all ourselves. There's nothing outside of us to help out, but puts the emphasis on promoting human dignity and human rights for all. Then on that definition of humanism, definitely Hitler and Stalin were definitely not humanists. Let's agree on that. They were, as Les said, anti-humanists. You couldn't come up with two more inhumane people than Hitler and Stalin, and a few others of their ilk as well. But yes, with Christianity, and as I keep saying, in all my everything I say and in all my work, I'm trying to distinguish between Christianity on one hand, which is a religion, 2,000-year-old religion, a big institution, big social cultural institution in the world. It's been around for a long time. It's done the odd little bit of good stuff, but it's also done heaps of bad stuff. I want to distinguish between that. I should say it's probably done a lot of good stuff, but yes, it's also done a lot of bad stuff. But I want to distinguish between Christianity, that cultural institution, the religious cultural institution phenomenon, and the gospel, the actual message that's just somewhere, as I've said, somewhere hidden deeply in Christianity, somewhere in there. And if Christianity has done anything good historically, then it's been because of that, not because of the rest of the stuff that's been overlaid to it. But yeah, looking to God for inspiration, looking to something outside ourselves. My contention is that, and right at the end of my presentation, I'd said something to the effect of, no courageous and well-intentioned humanism on its own can get the job done. We absolutely need that outside inspiration. Inspiration, yes, and the operative word, as you said, is inspiration. The gods that we hoped in the past might actually intervene on our behalf, and some people are still wanting that God to intervene. People want God to intervene to heal them and to get them a job or a car park or something like that. Those gods have history has showed, all the evidence has showed they simply don't exist. But the fact that humanity has undergone significant metanoia already, and that's, as I said, to me, evidence for, if not tantamount to a proof of, the fact that there must be some sort of God out there who is able to give that spiritual inspiration to sort of be able to download into individuals and groups collectively, because it's all about selflessness, which is always which is always reaching out to others. So it's always a collective thing by definition. It's a real objective download of spiritual energy and agency, real inspiration. Without that inspiration, humanism, of the best sort of humanism, as you defined it, the best sort of humanism will still not, it doesn't matter how courageous and well-intentioned it is, will still not be enough on its own. Without that, it's got to have that outside inspiration. So I think we agree on a lot of stuff, maybe.
I agree with you.
But we
I
do
agree with you on that
we do
point.
disagree
Can I
on
say this?
something.
No, but I agree with you on one point. I agree with you on one point. And I'm going to say this because I still have the mic just for a quick second. I would jettison any discussion of genes because genetic science does not point to anything selfish, altruistic, anything of that nature. What I would argue, and many people have heard me already say this, what I would say, and I think I think you and I, in one sense, I mean, in a very important sense, agree in that there is something outside. I just don't think it is divine or should be worshiped in any way. There's no reason to worship it, and there's certainly no reason to believe that it's Christian. So I do believe that there's a metaphysic of justice and morality that does inspire the individual, doesn't ideally could and should inspire society were it not for capitalism, the billionaire class. But I agree with you. And I agree with you. There's something outside. Again, I come back to this. I'll just conclude on this note. We have to jettison this discussion of genetics because that gets us nowhere. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Thank you, George.
SoFiA, your turn.
Hello, thank you, David, for recognizing me on the microphone, and Sir Ginley, is it Ginley?
Fergus McGinley. McGinley.
McGinley.
McGinley.
Excuse me. Thank you, Sir McGinley. And Sir David. Apologies for my tardiness and lateness to the meeting. I was I forgot I had another person that's here present in the meeting now emailed address in my account, in my Gmail account. So I emailed them to get the email, to get the link, because I really wanted to make tonight's meeting. But Sir McGinley, could you give me a little bit of context as to your lecture so I wanted to make a couple of points about Christ and then maybe one or two about humanism and Hitler. So could you give me a little bit more context as to what the subject of your, so I can add a little more context to my comments? Just that overall heading, just the subject.
Well, the subject is metanoia, which and the question of it, how it occurs. Now, defining metanoia, it's the and it's relatively commonly used term these days in psychology, in literary theory and theology, even in education. It's talking about a radical transformation of mindset. But I define it in very specific terms, in terms of a transformation of an individual human being and a collective transformation of culture and society from what I consider a natural-born, selfish, self-centered, self-absorbed state to a gradual transformation to a more selfless way of operating and being in the world and cooperating with others. Kindness, friendliness, generosity, selflessness, caring for others, and so on. This metanoia, this wonderful metanoia transformation with a capital M.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it to some degree it does. I've never heard the term metanoia before, so new term to me. But to talk about humanism and Christ and that sort of thing, the comments I wanted to make there, well, maybe some rabbis that were going around at the time, that the person that was named Yeshua or Jesus or Joshua or Jonah Bar Joseph, maybe some of those guys that were going around with some of the similar teachings, who had similar teachings as each other, claiming to be the Messiah or the Christ, the anointed one from on high. Maybe some of those guys were true altruistic humanists and the truest, most enlightened, and might I say, dare I say it, in divine sense of the word or term. Now, I used to be one that was fearfully devout and devoutly fearful And even how does the verse go in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Bible? Let fear God, let fear alone God above, and let him alone be your dread, and let him alone be your fear. Let him alone be your fear, and let him alone be your dread. Well, I was not only fearful and dreadful of God, but am yet now ever terrified of God, because I let my mind wander where it shouldn't have gone. No one should spend several years meditating on what omniscience means, on what omnipresence truly means, even though those two are the real light powers of God. But omnipotence, true omnipotence, no one should meditate about, because that'll mess somebody up. And I'll tell you what, if Christ, if God, if any of the gods could feed the poor, could do away with starvation and human suffering and sexual trafficking and every form of suffering, and they haven't done it yet, either they're already dead because they committed suicide a long time ago, or they got wiped out by some god plague, or they just don't care. And I'll tell you what, if Christ really did care, and he's up there somewhere, not returning for some God-forsaken reason, if and when I die, and if there is something else up there where Christ is seated, if he's still not being crucified and on the cross wailing and gnashing his teeth in pain, I'm going to be so pissed off at him. And I'm going to demand that he's crucified over an open pit, flaming for all of heaven to see. Because starvation for children ought not ever be. 25,000 children died a day of starvation, and that should have never been. And God alone could have got rid of that and could have nipped that right in the bud by not planting one seed in that garden. And he still planted it.
Yeah.
So that's the motherfucker that caused that. I'm concerned that, as far as I'm concerned, not only caused the curse, planned for the curse, but wrote the curse into the whole thing anyway.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with this, SoFiA. The continued existence of all those terrible things you mentioned, human trafficking, starvation of children, etc., etc. To me, that's proof positive that the God who you're portraying, and even when you say Christ, the gods, let him alone be your dread. You were quoting, I think, from somewhere in the Old Testament. To me, the continued existence of those things is proof positive that God, those gods, and yes, Christ with a capital C, just does not exist. Because if any of them ever existed, well, yeah, we wouldn't be in this pickle that we're in. So to me, it's proof positive that those things. But you say, I noticed that you're fearfully devoutly fearful. Let him alone be your dread. Still terrified of God, of that God. Anyway, so I've got nothing but good news for you on that count. That God definitely don't exist.
Well, can I tell? I'm absolutely terrified of that. I'm terrified. I'm not necessarily I'm terrified. I'm not terrified in a, how do you call it, an anthropomorphic God.
Yeah.
I'm not terrified in an anthropomorphic God, a God that is like a human being. I'm terrified of something that the Kabbalah refers to as the Ein Sof, the ineffable God. the God that is beyond description, the God that is beyond the beyond, the God that is the one above all, the all above one, and that sort of thing. The God that is not just created morality, but the God that is beyond morality. Because the God that is beyond, not just created, because we can conceive in our minds, human minds can conceive of a God that if God, we go, God, okay, we conceive in God, then we say God must have created morality. Then we say, God, it must adhere to some sort of moral code. But if there's a God beyond morality, then perhaps we say, then, that God has no moral code, for because our moral codes don't apply to that God, because that God probably has not what he would say, but what we would say, a skewed version of morality. But it's not our morality, it's his morality, or whatever, if he even calls it that. And so I have no choice but to fear God, because I fear not God, but if God, what God can do or would do to me if he ripped his claws or talons into me, or just, I don't know, should feel like doing it for shits and giggles.
Well, you're terrified of the ineffable God, the God of the Cabal, a God beyond morality. I think, and I'm just going to probably repeat myself here, all those gods likewise, you describe them as anthropomorphic, but I think they're all simply projections in one form or another of the human self. Hitler claimed divine warrant for his atrocities, but that God who he claimed for divine warrant, I haven't got the slightest doubt that it was simply the God he wanted to exist, which was basically a projection of what was in his heart itself. So ineffable, Kabbalistic, or beyond morality, I don't think any of those gods exist either. And I just find no evidence for them, mainly because I find no evidence whatsoever for their existence.
Neville, go ahead.
Thank you, David. I'd like to go to intellectual history, which, as people know here, I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, but intellectual history is probably my primary area. And because it was no longer being taught at any of the levels of education in Australia, everyone's talking in confused languages when it comes to what they think they know about the history. So the irony is, and George may be comforted by this, in the 1980s, I was the one that was leading the battle against the anti-humanist fundamentalists in Queensland who were spouting that sort of very direct linkage between humanism and fascism. It is then ironical that I'm dealing with the other side of the coin. Extremism is at one end. Extreme thought is at both ends. And the thing is that, this crowd here, with many good exceptions, don't read. They've given up, long life learning, and are just spouting their prejudices. If you went to Sarah Baker's book, and I know, of course, Les also has engaged with Sarah Baker, in the history. This is a history. This is the most recent, thorough, comprehensive history of humanism. Baker herself, as a humanist scholar, does make the connections, the threads between 19th century versions of humanism and the 20th century Nazi movement. It is not, as the fundamentalists argued, stupidly, there is no direct connection. But it is about the problem, and it's to do with people in this audience too. Your problem about the way you think, because you haven't bothered to do the research and read the books. So Sarah Bakewell sort of makes a number of identifies a number of the threads, but I'll just mention one thread, and that was that Hitler took an interest in Voltaire. Now, of course, Fergus is right and Les is right. It is an abusive reading. It's an abusive cognition of how Hitler read Voltaire. But this is basically what people are talking about in very confused ways. You know, you need professional historians. I'm in bloody poverty because, not just because of the politicians in terms of higher education policy, not just because the vice chancellors in terms of implementing those policies, which have reduced the fields of learning in Australian universities, but because of the public marketplace, which is more interested in propagating their own individual prejudice than actually picking up the book and studying it.
Great, thank you, Neville. The extreme thoughts at both ends. Yeah. Can I just say, David, that I've got to go in about 15 minutes. So probably one more question after this. But no, thank you, Neville. I'm not really not sure what to say about yeah. You know, I don't come from an academic. I'm a great book reader, obviously. I'm always looking for a new book, but so the extreme. I'm always searching for what's at the centre. You know, the well-known concept of the radical centre, which is I came across it through Noel Pearson, of all people. So I'm looking for this radical centre, which is, and I often describe it not as the lowest common denominator, but the highest common factor, which betrays my career in mathematics. Extremism is the problem, and they are totally different. I agree. They are different, but in a certain profound, deep sense, they end up being the same in their execution. Sorry, go ahead, Neville.
Unmute yourself, Neville.
Thank you. Yes. I've written on, I've written on Noel Preston, in terms of Queensland history, and I'm involved with the groups that continue his legacy. And I also label the work that I'm doing as a form of centralism. So, indeed, that's right. But the problem, I think, why I'm so angry and so frustrated about my poverty is because, like I said, it's not just the academics, not just the politicians, but in terms of the populists who are squeezing from the extremes. We've been squeezed in the last several decades. That is, the centre has been squeezed. Yes, out of a job.
Thank you, Neville.
Thank you, Neville.
Fergus, as you wish to go soon, perhaps if Les is okay, we can go to Earl, because Earl hasn't had a chance to participate yet. Go ahead, Earl. Good. We
Thank
can't
you,
hear.
David. I didn't have my microphone in, and I really appreciate. Um, I am just entranced that we're sitting here discussing Hitler's philosophy because it keeps me awake at night wondering what Hitler thought the day before. Never mind. Um, I have a little bit of advice to Fergus on religions because I had a friend who was into yoga and a whole bunch of new age stuff, and she was also a Christian, and she was kind of inventing her own religion as she went along. And her problem was every time she read a new book, she had to add a new department to her religion. And you can imagine religion is a broad word. It covers a whole bunch of like, where did we come from? Is there a God? Is you know all the questions. Um, and this religion has to satisfy, what are we now, 8 billion people, or as many people are in this church, and with all their needs. And I'm always concerned with Catholics and their entrancement with icons. They have crucifixes, they have rosaries, they have um, strange performances, and it tends to curdle my Protestant blood a little bit. I have a lot of respect for Catholics, but some of the things they do concerns me. But I'm not sticking my nose into the Catholic Church. You know, it's their business. But the point is that these things, when a Catholic says the Rosary, when a Catholic uh, kneels before a crucifix, this is real emotional reality to them. It brings them closer to God. I have no doubt of their sincerity and their piety. It just isn't my way. But religion has to cover all of this. And so when you're starting a new religion, you've got a big job ahead of you, Fergus. Simply covering all the bases, just the broad. And the other thing you got to say about Christianity is that it's been around for 2,000 years through a lot of different situations. It was originally founded in a colony of the Roman Empire, and then it took over the Roman Empire, and then the Roman Empire broke down, and you have the history of Europe ever since then, which is a really tumultuous, crazy history. And Christianity has been dragged all the way through it, part as an instigator and part as a victim. It very often it was more politics than religion. And after your new religion, Fergus, if I look back at it 2,000 years from now, I got a feeling that you may have attracted a few people who didn't enhance your public image of your religion. Basically, I wanted to look at original sin. As a species, we are made up of individuals. If there are no individuals, there is no species. So every individual has built into him self-preservation from the day he's born. Babies are not sinful in the normal sense, but there's no baby who doesn't have self-preservation built into him, because if the baby didn't, he wouldn't drink milk and he wouldn't survive. And of course, every individual has to be part of society, because these days we can't exist without society, and we actually never could. We're not like cats. So that's the conflict between individuals and societies, and what's the traditional Christian answer to that? That we have sin built into us, and it's a lifelong struggle to overcome. And that's like, sin is not some mysterious force that's produced. Is it produced by a gene? Sure it is. But it's not. it's not something sinister. It's just part of the human condition. And the question isn't, are we sinful? The question is, how do we overcome our sinful nature? And Christianity has an answer for that. Thanks, Fergus. I really appreciate being able. I was very impressed by your presentation, the part I saw of it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Will. Yeah, you seem to be saying that I was making up a new religion. Heaven forbid. What involved, and you described the friend of yours who does yoga and then keeps on adding new things to it. You also described religion needs to cover all bases and have answers to all sorts of questions and so on. I see myself as not doing any addition to religions, but doing subtractions. I'm trying to find a way of subtracting out of Christianity, in my case, because that's my background, subtracting out of it a whole lot of stuff which is not merely false, but incredibly harmful. So yeah, I'm interested in, I guess you might say, a sort of more minimalist approach to religion. The less of it, the better, I reckon. Original sin, born with inbuilt self-preservation, which is instinctive, and absolutely spot on. But that in my view is not what sin is. Sin, that reality which we inherit from the entire history of the evolution of life on Earth, that reality. And by the way, human children have the least amount of this instinctive self-preservation, least amount of instinct. I mean, human children are the most vulnerable, most highly dependent on their parents from the get-go. So much less of but nevertheless, it is because they are life, we are life. They're born with this inbuilt, but that's not a thing for self-presentation. But that's not yet sin. That's a propensity, a real instinctive propensity, which eventually gives rise almost inevitably. I'd say almost. I think actually inevitably. Gives rise to what we'd call sin, which is conscious, intentional, selfish action. A little baby, when they're first born, is not capable of conscious, intentional action of any sort. They're basically, at that point, 99.9% in a body, an instinctive body starting out in the world. It's the self-consciousness which gives rise to the propensity for what I call sin, which is conscious, intentional selfishness, cuts in a bit later. And absolutely. So sin in that sense, totally agree. It's not a genetics, not biologically based. It's not a genetic thing. It's also not something we inherit genetically from primordial parents who obviously I don't believe ever existed. So, but then the $64,000 question, which is exactly what I was saying and which you identified, is how do we overcome that propensity for self-preservation first and bugger everyone else. They might get a look in if they're lucky later. So great. Thank you, Earl. I hope that gives a good answer to the question, a reasonable answer to the question. David and everybody, look, I've really got to go. I've got another appointment to get to, and it's what's it 4:08 here. It's 4:38 over in Melbourne. So thank you so much for being willing to listen to me.
Thank you.
I'm always astonished that anyone wants to listen to.
and Fergus will be addressing us again in a few months' time on his latest book, New Romans.
It's a latest project, I call it. It's a long way from a book yet. I'm releasing it chapter by chapter. The introduction and chapter 1 are now available, but by the time I present, there'll probably be 3 or 4 chapters out, which I'll let people know through if it's all right, through the Sea of Faith Facebook site when next chapter's out on June the 22nd. And happy for people to send me their thoughts and disagree with everything I say if they want. I'd love to hear what people
Would you like to put your email in the chat?
Yeah, well, the best way to find me and all my work is simply, and I can see my name on the screen. I'm presumably everyone else can see my name. If you Google my name, you will find no one else but me, because no one else on this planet has been crazy enough to have parents to call him Fergus McGinley. So you'll get to my website is fergusmcginley.com. So just Google my name and you'll get to my website and to everything you need to know about me. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. It's hard to hide when you've got a name like that.
Well, thank you again, Ferguson. That was terrific.
Great. I'm very honoured, and thank you, David, for letting me and so thank you, everybody. Farewell, and look forward to seeing you next time. And I'm happy to hear from you via email and check out the website as well. Okay now, David? Okay.
Well, the discussion was Fergus is absent.
Yeah, keep discussing.
Cheerio, Fergus.
Yeah, cheerio.
Good. Well, the discussion will just continue on, and by the way, Fergus mentioned he's putting he has put reviews of his works and his website, etc., in the SoFiA Facebook page, which is known as SoFiA Talk, and we have very interesting discussions on our SoFiA Talk Facebook page. So I would invite everybody to join it. It's not a public group. It's a private group, so you have to actually join, and you'll find the link on the meetup page. Les, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, David. It's a pity Fergus is gone, because I wanted to get to the pointy end of the stick, or the pointy end of the pencil. So he's given us the diagnosis. We're all feeling and acting too selfish. We need more thinking about other people, and he's got the solution. Jesus is the teacher who can teach us to be less selfish. And I wanted to ask him then, the next step, implementation. How do we implement this solution? And I was thinking of the Christian nationalists currently in the United States, because they're implementing their Christian nationalist solution with the displaying of the 10 Commandments outside courthouses and schools. And they've just strengthened the prayer group within Congress. And they've got a whole host of other things too to bring Christianity and Jesus more into government and to the population. So that's why I wanted to ask him, how do we get his Jesus solution to the masses so that we can fix, global warming and wealth inequality and all the other big problems that we have?
Well, what can we say?
Maybe we need to call him back to talk about the implementation phase.
Now, for some reason, Neville's waving his hand.
Well, I can answer the question, given that I'm working in Queensland or Brisbane, whereas Fergus is working in Adelaide. But her work is very similar, not exact. I probably have a kind of evolutionary Christian / post-Christian. I mean, part of the problem, I think, it's sort of a characteristic of what Les is asking in referring to Christian nationalism. I mean, what is Christianity and what is it becoming and how it's evolving? So you're right, Les, it's a good question, because it's a question I'm wrestling in terms of how do you break through? And I think, this is only a partial answer. It's not a total answer, but I think it's the problem of politics. And when I say politics, in being inclusive here, I'm talking about party politics. I'm talking about personal politics. I'm talking about organizational politics, all sorts of forms of politics. And the thing is that the political narratives are often the blockage for anyone, whether they describe themselves as Christian, post-Christian, non-Christian, anti-Christian. I think that's the politics is part of the problem that is blocking us to the solutions that are already there, that we already know. We know what we've got to do for climate change. We know that. But it's the political arguments that are creating the blockage. And this is true not just for climate change, but for all the sort of big social problems that we are wrestling with. So that's my offer to you, Les.
That's okay, Les?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll Philip, you're next. Go ahead.
I'd like to react on what Les said. I don't know if this answers your question, but didn't Europe, through Christianity, put up hospitals, universities, all started with Christianity? University of Leuven, all those things. I don't know if that answers the question. Sometimes we forget that it was Christianity that made modern Europe. There was the medieval age, and then later on the Enlightenment age, thanks to the Arabs. But it was Christianity that started probably what we know of Europe today. Okay. My question, I don't know. I did not ask it a while ago because I don't think it was part of the discussion. But I have to ask permission from David Miller if I can ask a question regarding St. Paul.
Sure, go ahead.
Actually, I think you're a better person to ask this. Since you're a Bart Ehrman listener, okay, I'm wondering if the whole Christianity was just based on St. Paul, Apostle Paul. And because the way I looked at, the more I listen to Bart Ehrman and read about Paul, he wanted to market, if I were to use a business term, he wanted to market a certain type. I don't know what he wanted to market. He couldn't market Judaism because he's going to go to the Gentiles. You can't market Judaism to the Gentiles. So what are you going to do? You have to market Jesus Christ. And that's where the start of where Christianity came. So it was not, I'm beginning to wonder if Apostle Paul didn't do that, we wouldn't have Christianity. So it was he packaged the whole thing. If it's from a marketing point of view.